My name's Alex. I'm 27, and if you had met me a year ago, you would have thought my life was pretty quiet. I had a steady job, lived in a small apartment not too far from my parents' place, and kept my head down. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't a troublemaker. I was just trying to build something for myself. But in my family, that wasn't enough. My mom, Linda, had a very particular definition of success, and if you weren't living it her way, you were living it wrong. My younger brother, Ryan, could do no wrong. He's 24, unemployed, and still living at home rent-free. But somehow he's ambitious because he's figuring out his path. Meanwhile, I was paying my own bills, but in her eyes, I was wasting my potential. The night everything started unraveling was a Sunday, one of those muggy evenings where the air felt thick and heavy. I had stopped by my parents' house after work because Mom had texted that she needed to talk. That phrase in my family never meant anything good. I pulled into the driveway and noticed a pile of my old clothes, hoodies, shirts, jeans, scattered on the lawn like someone had been airing out dirty laundry in the most literal way possible. I figured maybe she was cleaning out the basement and hadn't gotten around to bringing them inside. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen with her arms crossed, her face tight and almost trembling. "Alex," she started, in that tone that means you're already guilty of something. "I'm done. I can't keep enabling you." I blinked, confused. "Enabling me? I live on my own, Mom." She let out this dry, bitter laugh and gestured toward the window where my clothes were lying in the grass. "You're a pathetic leech. Don't ever come back here unless you've grown up." I just stood there, trying to process the absurdity. Leech was the last word anyone would use to describe me, except my mother. Ryan, who had been lounging on the couch, piped up with a smirk. "She's right, man. Maybe it's time you figure out how to be independent." This from the guy who still had his laundry done by Mom. I wanted to laugh, but my chest was burning too much. I asked what this was really about, and Mom just said, "You drain this family with your negativity. You're never satisfied." I didn't even know what she meant. I barely even saw them anymore except for the occasional Sunday dinner. But it was clear she had already decided I was the villain in whatever story she'd been telling herself. I went outside, gathered my clothes into my arms, and stuffed them into the trunk of my car. She followed me to the driveway, her voice sharp enough for the neighbors to hear. "Don't ever come back. You're not welcome here." I didn't shout back. I didn't argue. I just got in my car and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel harder than I realized. For the first few days, I told myself it was just another one of her dramatic flare-ups, that she'd cool down and call me. But the call never came. Weeks passed, then months. And in that time, I started to piece together little things, subtle signs that this wasn't just about negativity or enabling. Friends who still talked to my family told me Ryan had been posting online about how I couldn't handle adult life and how he and Mom were better off without certain toxic people. I didn't respond, but I kept reading, each post making me feel like they were trying to erase me altogether. By the time 6 months had gone by, I had stopped expecting any kind of reconciliation. I had built up walls so high that even if they wanted to talk, I wasn't sure I'd let them in. Which is why it was so jarring when one morning I woke up to see my phone lit up with over 70 messages from Mom, all sent overnight. Some were short, like, "Please call me," or "I'm sorry." Others were paragraphs, talking about how Ryan had made some bad decisions, how things at the house were falling apart, and how she needed me to come home. And there was one message in particular, buried in the middle, that made my stomach turn. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a single line. "You're the only one who can fix this." That's when I realized this wasn't about making peace at all. I didn't respond right away. In fact, I stared at those messages for a good hour before even unlocking my phone. My gut told me that if I replied too quickly, I'd get pulled right back into the same cycle, the same trap of being the family's problem solver without ever getting respect or acknowledgement. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. Later that afternoon, I called my aunt, someone who'd always been on my side in a quiet, background sort of way. She sighed heavily when I mentioned Mom's sudden flood of messages. "Alex," she said, lowering her voice, "I think you should know. Ryan's in trouble. Bad trouble. Your mom's not telling you everything." She didn't have all the details, but apparently Ryan had invested money he didn't have into some kind of scheme with his friends, something about flipping cars and reselling them, and it had gone south fast. From what she'd heard, He owed a decent chunk to someone who wasn't exactly the patient type. And Mom, she had already dipped into her savings to help him out once, but now that money was gone, the pieces started clicking together in my head, and it was almost laughable. They'd thrown me out like trash, and now, suddenly, I was the only one who could fix things. Still, I kept my distance. I didn't reply to her messages, which seemed to only make her ramp up the guilt. A few days later, she left a voicemail, her voice dripping with that performative sadness she'd perfected over the years. Alex, you know family is all we have. Ryan is your brother. He's made mistakes, but you can't just abandon him. What kind of man turns his back on his own blood? I listened to that message twice, not because I was swayed, but because it was so textbook her, skip over her own actions, paint herself as the martyr, and paint me as the cold, ungrateful son. Around that same time, I started hearing from mutual friends that my name was being tossed around in conversations at family get-togethers. Apparently, I was selfish now, arrogant, because I didn't need anyone's help. Ryan had told people that I had money, but was too stingy to help my own family. The hypocrisy was so loud it was almost funny. This was the same brother who hadn't paid for his own phone bill in years. The tension really began building when my cousin Emily reached out. She's one of the few relatives I've always trusted, and she didn't sugarcoat it. They're planning to corner you, she warned. I overheard Mom talking to Ryan about getting you to come to the house. They think if you see him in person, you'll crack and agree to help. I asked why they thought I'd even set foot near that place after what happened. Emily hesitated for a moment before saying, because they're telling everyone you're already thinking about forgiving them. They're rewriting the whole story. That made my blood boil. Not only had they tossed me aside, but now they were actively spreading lies to make themselves look better, setting me up to be the villain if I didn't give them what they wanted. I could feel the familiar pressure starting to creep in, that manipulative mix of guilt and obligation they'd always used to keep me in line. But this time, something was different. I wasn't the same person who had silently packed up his clothes from the lawn 6 months ago. I had my own space, my own life, and for the first time, I realized I had leverage they didn't even know about. Still, the messages kept coming, sometimes sad, sometimes angry, sometimes almost threatening in tone. And with every one I read, I could feel them getting more desperate and more reckless. And then came the day they showed up at my door. It was a Wednesday evening, just after I'd gotten home from work. I'd kicked off my shoes, started boiling some pasta, and was enjoying the quiet hum of my apartment. That's when the pounding started, not a knock, but a heavy, urgent thud against my door, the kind that makes your stomach drop. I froze for a second, hoping maybe it was a delivery gone wrong. But then I heard her voice. Alex, open the door. We need to talk. Mom. Every muscle in my body tightened. I hadn't seen her face to face since the day she'd thrown my clothes onto the lawn. I stood there, unmoving, letting the water on the stove keep boiling. She knocked again, harder this time. Alex, I know you're in there. Don't make me cause a scene. That last part wasn't an empty threat. She'd caused plenty of public spectacles when she wanted to. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open just enough to look out. And there she was, standing in the hallway with Ryan right behind her. He had his hands in his hoodie pocket, eyes darting everywhere but mine. Mom didn't waste time on pleasantries. You've ignored my calls long enough, she said, trying to push the door open further. I stepped into the gap, blocking her. You can't just show up here, I said. I told you. Alex, we're desperate, she cut in, her tone dripping with that calculated desperation that sounded like vulnerability but always had sharp edges underneath. Ryan's in real trouble. We need 10,000. Just a loan. You'll get it back. I almost laughed, a short, bitter sound. You threw me out, remember? Told me I was a leech. Now I'm the one you come to for money. Ryan finally spoke, but his voice was defensive, almost sneering. Don't act like you're some saint. You've been sitting on cash while your family struggles. I narrowed my eyes. How do you even know what I have? I've never told you. That's when Mom looked away, just for a split second. And it hit me. I turned my gaze back to Ryan. What did you do? He shifted uncomfortably, then muttered. We saw your bank statement. My stomach went cold. I hadn't given them anything. No login, no access. How? I demanded. Mom finally sighed, like she was the one being inconvenienced. Your mail still came to the house for a while after you left. One of them had your bank information. I opened it because I thought it might be important. I saw you had enough to help, so. She trailed off like it was no big deal. I stepped back, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. You opened my mail? And showed him. My voice cracked from the mix of disbelief and anger. Ryan didn't even try to hide it now. Yeah, because we knew you'd play this game, acting like you can't afford it. 10 grand is nothing to you. That was the moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was a violation. They had pried into my private life, used it to size up what they could take, and then shown up at my door like it was their right. Get out, I said quietly. Mom tried to protest, but I raised my voice. Get out. They didn't leave right away. Ryan mumbled something about family doesn't turn on each other, and Mom gave me one last guilt-soaked stare before finally pulling him toward the elevator. I shut the door and stood there for a long time, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. But later that night, as I replayed it all, I realized something else. This wasn't just betrayal. It was leverage. They'd just handed me a clear picture of how far they were willing to go. And I knew then that if I stayed quiet, it would only get worse. What I didn't know yet was how far they were about to push me over the edge. The days after that confrontation felt heavy, like someone had thrown a weighted blanket over my life that I couldn't shake off. I'd always thought I had a high tolerance for family drama. Years of passive-aggressive comments, favoritism toward Ryan, and quiet digs at my character had built up a kind of emotional callus. But this was different. The invasion of my privacy, the blatant entitlement, the sheer belief that my money was theirs to claim, it stuck with me in a way I couldn't just brush off. I stopped sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom standing in my doorway, Ryan looming behind her, both of them armed with the knowledge of my finances like it was a weapon. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and check the locks on my door twice. I even called my bank to set up additional security alerts, half expecting them to try something more direct. And then it got worse. About a week later, I got an email from my landlord saying someone had called pretending to be me, asking a few questions about my apartment lease and payment methods. Thankfully, he knew my voice well enough to be suspicious and hung up. But when I asked if they'd given a name, he hesitated before saying, "They said they were your brother." That was the moment it hit me. They weren't just going to let this go. They'd been bold enough to open my mail, bold enough to show up uninvited. If they thought I was their only option, they'd keep pressing until they got what they wanted. I was already at the edge, and the thought of them creeping further into my life was suffocating. Socially, it started to wear me down, too. Friends who still had ties to my family would drop little comments like, "Your mom seemed really upset you're ignoring her," or, "Ryan told us you're going through something. He's worried about you." I knew exactly what they were doing, flipping the story so I was the cold, distant one, while they played the victims. It chipped away at my resolve more than I wanted to admit. One night, I sat at my kitchen table, lights dim, staring at my phone. Mom's name was lit up in my messages again, this time with a long, rambling text about how Ryan might lose everything and how I'd regret it if something happened to him. For a split second, I felt that old reflex, the urge to rush in, to fix it, to be the good son who carried everyone else's problems. But then I remembered the way she'd stood in my doorway, telling me I owed them, like my life was just an extension of theirs. That was when I realized I had two choices. Either keep playing their game until I was drained dry, or step away completely, not just emotionally, but strategically. I couldn't just cut contact. They'd already proven they'd push boundaries. I needed to move my defenses further out, quietly. Over the next week, I started making small moves. I changed my phone number and gave it only to a few trusted people. I switched my mailing address to a P.O. box and closed the old bank account they'd seen. I even began looking at rentals in a different part of the city, somewhere they wouldn't expect. But while I was pulling back, I wasn't just retreating. Every step away gave me a clearer view of the bigger picture, and of just how tangled Ryan's situation really was. From little snippets I picked up through Emily and my aunt, I began piecing together exactly how deep he'd gotten into trouble and exactly how Mom had tied herself to it. And with that knowledge came a dangerous, almost electric thought. Maybe I didn't just have to walk away. Maybe I could do something far more permanent. The kind of move they'd never see coming. The shift started quietly, almost invisibly at first. With my new phone number, fresh bank accounts, and a P.O. box far from their reach, The constant buzzing of manipulative texts and calls stopped overnight. The silence was unnerving for the first few days, like stepping out into a street you'd always known to be noisy and finding it eerily still. But then I realized that silence wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space to think. Space to build. I poured that mental energy into my work. I'd been a mid-level project manager at a logistics company for years, and I'd always done well enough to be respected, but I had never pushed myself beyond the safe lane. Now, with the emotional fog lifting, I was sharper. My focus improved. I started volunteering for projects nobody else wanted, the messy ones with tight deadlines and impossible clients, and I delivered. Not just on time, but ahead of schedule, with clean results. My boss noticed. Within 3 months, I was promoted to senior manager with a salary bump big enough to make my savings account feel like it was finally breathing. Outside of work, I began making new connections. Emily introduced me to a small network of people she knew through her own work, accountants, real estate agents, even a lawyer who handled contracts for startups. These weren't just friendly introductions, they were strategic. I learned how to move money through secure investments, how to structure ownership so that assets weren't easily traceable, and how to position myself so that if anyone ever came sniffing around for a loan, they'd see nothing but closed doors. But it wasn't all business. With the stress gone, I had time for myself again. I picked up old hobbies, hiking on weekends, photography, even cooking. The more I built a life on my own terms, the more I saw how little my mother's approval had actually mattered all these years. I'd been chasing her validation like it was currency, but now that I'd stopped, my self-worth wasn't in her hands anymore. Financially, I moved from comfortable to secure. I bought a small condo, nothing flashy, but entirely mine, no co-signers, no strings. I set up multiple income streams, some from my job, others from investments I made through contacts I'd met. I kept everything tight-lipped, shared only what was necessary with only the most trusted people. And here's the part that gave me a quiet, almost guilty satisfaction. While I was rising, I could see, from a distance, that their world was shrinking. Through Emily and the occasional slip from my aunt, I heard that Ryan's debts were growing and Mom's finances were strained from constantly bailing him out. They'd sold a few valuables, downsized some of their lifestyle, but kept up the image for the outside world. I didn't intervene. I didn't even acknowledge it. Because I knew something they didn't. The stronger I got, the weaker their hold over me became. And if I kept going, I wouldn't just be out of their reach. I'd be in a position to turn the tables completely. It wasn't revenge yet. Not exactly. But every promotion, every smart financial move, every new connection felt like laying bricks in a wall they could never climb. Then came the phone call from Emily that would change everything. Her voice was low, urgent. "Alex, you need to hear what they're planning." Emily didn't usually sound rattled. She's the type who could tell you your house was on fire in the same tone she'd use to read a grocery list. But this time, I could hear the tightness in her voice, like she was debating whether to even tell me. "I was over at Mom's earlier," she said, helping her with some paperwork. She didn't know I was in the kitchen when she started talking to Ryan in the living room. "They were whispering about you." I leaned back in my chair, pen frozen over the notes I'd been taking for work. "What about me?" Emily hesitated, then said, "They're going to try to trap you. Mom thinks she can get you to come to the house by saying she's sick, really sick, and that she needs you to sign something for family business. Ryan told her to make it urgent so you wouldn't have time to think about it. He actually used the words catch him off guard." I let out a humorless laugh. "And what's this something she needs me to sign?" "That's the thing," Emily said, her voice dropping even lower. I saw part of it when she left it on the counter. "It's not just family paperwork. It's a guarantee form, like a co-signer agreement, for a private loan. If you sign it, you're on the hook for the whole amount if Ryan can't pay. And it's not small, Alex. It's 6 figures." For a few seconds, I didn't say anything. My mind was already piecing together the layers. The fake illness, the sudden request, the emotional ambush. They hadn't just crossed the line, they were sprinting into outright fraud. Emily must have sensed my silence because she quickly added, "I know you're not going to fall for it, but I thought you should know what they're capable of. They're desperate, Alex. Desperate people do stupid things." I thanked her and hung up, but I didn't feel shaken. Not this time. Instead, there was a strange clarity settling in. They'd just shown me their final play before they even made it. That meant I had the upper hand. Over the next week, I started putting pieces in place, not to avoid them, but to face them on my terms. Through my new connections, I reached out to a corporate attorney I'd met at one of Emily's dinners. I explained the situation without names at first, framing it as a hypothetical. He confirmed what I already suspected. If I had proof they were trying to trick me into co-signing a fraudulent loan, I could not only refuse it, but potentially put them in serious legal trouble. That conversation lit a fuse in my mind. If they wanted to play dirty, I could make sure their mess came to light in a way they couldn't spin. But I didn't just want to stop them. I wanted to make sure they'd never be in a position to pull something like this on me or anyone again. So I started building a paper trail. Emily agreed to document everything she overheard, including dates, times, and exact wording. I quietly recorded a few calls with Mom where she hinted at needing my signature for something important. I even arranged for a financial investigator, a contact from one of my recent projects, to quietly dig into Ryan's business dealings. Every step felt deliberate, calculated. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't letting anger cloud the plan. The more I learned, the more power I had. And with each piece of evidence, the plan in my head got sharper. I wasn't just going to block their play. I was going to flip it. And then, one Saturday morning, the opportunity fell right into my lap. A text from Mom saying, "Alex, I'm not well. Can you come over today? It's important. Please don't wait." I stared at the text for a long moment, letting the weight of its familiarity sink in. The wording was exactly what Emily had warned me about: urgent, pleading, and vague enough to hide the hook. My first instinct was to ignore it. But then I realized this was the moment I'd been preparing for. If I played this right, I could not only shut their plan down but turn the entire situation back on them in one clean move. I texted back simply, "I'll be there in an hour." Before leaving, I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, the recording app already open and running. My lawyer contact had told me that in our state, as long as one party in a conversation consents to the recording, it's legal. And I had every intention of letting them talk themselves into a corner. When I pulled up to my parents' house, nothing about it suggested Mom was sick. The blinds were open, the driveway was clear, and I could hear the faint sound of the TV from outside. Ryan answered the door, his expression somewhere between smug and strained. "Glad you came, man," he said, stepping aside. Mom's been worried. She was sitting at the kitchen table, dressed neatly, a stack of papers laid out in front of her. "Alex," she said softly, putting on her best fragile voice, "thank you for coming. I hate to trouble you, but I need your help with something." I sat down across from her, keeping my voice neutral. "What's going on?" She slid the papers toward me, and even without looking too closely, I recognized the form, exactly as Emily had described. "It's just a little formality," Mom said. "Ryan's in a tight spot, and this will help him get back on his feet. You won't even have to do anything after this. It's just your signature." I picked up the first page and slowly flipped through, making a show of reading. "Looks like a co-signer agreement for a private loan," I said evenly. "6 figures. If Ryan can't pay, I'm responsible." Ryan leaned forward. "Yeah, but it's temporary. We'll pay it off fast. You make good money, so it's no risk." I looked from him to Mom, my expression unreadable. "So you opened my mail, learned about my accounts, and decided this was your solution?" The silence was thick. Mom blinked, caught off guard that I'd said it out loud. "Alex, we were just thinking about yourselves." I cut in, keeping my tone calm but cold. "You were going to trick me into signing this. And you were counting on me not asking questions." Ryan tried to laugh it off, but it came out forced. "Come on, it's not like that." I reached into my jacket and set my phone on the table, screen still lit with the recording app. "It's exactly like that. And I have everything you just said on record. Oh, and by the way, the person you thought you could rope into this? I've been working with an attorney. If I hand over this recording and the other evidence I have, this isn't just a failed scam. It's fraud." The color drained from Ryan's face. Mom's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words, but nothing came out. I stood, sliding the papers back toward them. "You wanted my signature? Here's my answer." I tapped the stack once and pushed it away. "No. And from now on, you don't contact me directly. If you do, my lawyer will handle it." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator. Then Mom's voice cracked as she said, "Alex, please, we're family." I met her eyes for the first time since I'd walked in. "Family doesn't ambush each other, Mom. Family doesn't dig through your private mail. You made your choice 6 months ago when you threw me out. Now I'm making mine." And with that, I walked out, leaving them sitting in the kitchen, staring at the papers they'd never get me to sign. What they didn't know was that the recording wasn't just for legal protection. It was the final piece in a plan that was about to hit them harder than they ever expected. I didn't drive straight home after leaving their house. Instead, I stopped at my lawyer's office, just like we'd arranged if the meeting actually happened. I handed over my phone, the fresh recording still saved, along with Emily's written notes and the other audio clips I'd gathered over the past few weeks. My lawyer listened in silence, jotting things down, and when it was over, he simply said, "They've left you a gift, Alex. This is enough to protect you, and if you want, it's enough to bury the loan for good." I told him I didn't want to ruin them financially just for the sake of it, but I did want to make sure they couldn't try this on anyone else. He filed the necessary complaints, one with the state's Consumer Protection Office for attempted fraudulent coercion, another with the private lender, notifying them that the co-signer they were expecting was approached under false pretenses. Within a week, I got word back. The lender had blacklisted Ryan entirely, refusing to process any loans with his name on them. The complaint also triggered a review of Mom's financial activity, which uncovered that she'd already co-signed multiple high-risk loans for him in the past year. Those lenders started calling in payments immediately. The fallout was brutal and fast. Ryan's business venture collapsed within a month, his partners walking away once they realized the easy cash had dried up. The debts he'd been juggling began stacking with interest, and without Mom able to cover for him, the late fees alone were enough to sink him. As for Mom, the social image she guarded so carefully started to crack. Emily told me whispers began spreading in the family about the loan incident, though no one seemed to know the exact details. People noticed that Mom had sold her jewelry, then her second car. She stopped hosting the family gatherings she'd once ruled over, and when she did show up somewhere, her smile was tight and brittle. They both tried reaching out again, of course. Ryan left a few voicemails swinging wildly between fake apologies and angry rants. Mom sent 2 long letters, one defensive, one pretending none of it ever happened. I didn't respond to either. Months later, I ran into them by chance at the grocery store. They were together, pushing a cart with the kind of slow, aimless pace of people who didn't really have anywhere else to be. Mom spotted me first, her expression flickering from surprise to something unreadable. Ryan avoided my eyes completely. I didn't stop. I didn't say a word. I just walked past, the click of my shoes echoing on the tile. Because by then, I finally understood something I should have realized years ago. I hadn't just escaped their grip. I'd taken away the one thing they'd always held over me, the belief that I needed them. And as the automatic doors slid shut behind me, I knew they'd never get it back.